Welcome to the Natural Healthy Lifestyle Show with Win-Win Women. I'm Rhonda Ormond Peterson, and I'm your show host. I have a special guest today, and I'm super excited to visit with her and have you meet her. She's a motivational speaker, a podcaster, and an author. And I found out that we grew up in the same small rural community, although I'm a generation ahead of her, and we didn't cross paths until recently. I first heard about Portia through a friend that was following her on social media. And through my friend, we were fortunate enough to book Portia to speak to a group of women in our church. I not only was impressed with her message, but her love for people. She has a great spirit, and you can feel it when you're with her. As I read her book, Living Louder, I felt a closeness to her. She is real and very open with her journey. I can see why so many people were touched by her message and her presence. Reading about the struggles that she went through helps you understand more about Portia's strength and conviction for the values and the purpose she believes in. She struggled a lot and became stronger through it. And because of her experiences, I think many women can understand and learn from her journey. And as they are going through tough times in their lives, they too can become stronger and rely on the sources that she did to strengthen them and help them through difficult times. I wanted to invite her to the show to share her story with my viewers. Portia's story is that of faith, kindness, and endurance through difficult times in her life. Serving time in federal prison not only changed her life, but those of everyone's lives she touched. You will be uplifted and inspired by her message of empowerment, compassion, and service. Welcome, Portia Louder.
Rhonda, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to spend time with your guests and with you today and just connect and learn from each other. So thank you.
Well, thank you. So I want to invite you to tell your story to our viewers. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn the time over to you for the rest of the show.
Thank you, Rhonda. Well, I grew up in Utah in a small town, and I am the oldest of 7 children. My life was the way that I was raised was pretty non-traditional. Anyone from Utah would know in southern Utah, a small town named Richfield, and we grew up outside of that. My parents were extremely creative. In fact, my mom was into all natural foods and healthy everything. She was kind of hippie-like, I guess you could say, before it was a thing. But we had no structure in our home. And I've learned myself that the structure and boundaries are important for me, but I also really enjoyed the creative aspect of my upbringing. One thing that I learned as I've been able to look back at that time in my life is how important it is that I take care of me. And I learned that because my mother really struggled with that. She had all these children, and so she focused so much on the kids that she kind of lost herself in our struggles. And so I made a commitment to myself at this point in my life to make sure no matter what my children and others are going through, to keep myself in a healthy place. My first real struggle was with relationships. I found everything outside myself is what I was looking to try to solve that emptiness that I felt inside. So it started out with relationships at a young age. I would say probably around 13 years old. And then I dabbled a little bit in alcohol and some other things that I think were somewhat destructive, and actually circled back around in my life and became a much bigger problem later on. As I grew into adulthood, I really just didn't, by the time I was 17, I ended up pregnant with my first child. And I remember moving out, and I was living in a low-income apartment with other women that had, that were single parents. And I remember feeling, I don't know if I would say hopeless, but I had no vision for myself and for a future. And continued to think that if I could just find the right relationship, that, life would get better for me. My parents moved from that town into the bigger city here in Utah, which I had never been to up to that point. So my world was fairly small. And I remember driving up to the town that my parents had moved into the city, and having some hope. I thought, I could get a job up here. Maybe I could, do something different. And so that was the first real kind of job that I had. I went to work as a photographer for a family member. And I remember feeling hopeful at that point about my future. And then I found out I was pregnant again. And I remember being sad, sad that that I was going to have another child, and that the child deserved better than what I could give the child. I mean, the child's father just said, "Hey, I'm not leaving this town, and I'm not interested in working it out." And so I was a single mother with 2 children, no child support, living with my parents, and it was pretty discouraging. I remember after about a year thinking again, if I could just find the right relationship, if I could just find somebody that would love my children and love me, and we could make a life. And, my daughter's husband, or my daughter's father, came back into the picture for a minute, said, "Hey, maybe we could try to work this out." And it's interesting because I look back and I remember talking to my dad and saying, "Dad, I think I have an important future, but I don't know if I can have anything in my life if I continue down the path I'm on." And he's like, "Oh, that's very true." He said, "You have so much potential, Portia." And shortly after that, I got involved in another relationship and got pregnant again. Probably your viewers are wondering why I didn't figure out what causes that. I look back at myself, and at this point in my life, I think, "Oh, Portia, gosh, it just makes me sad for my younger self to have to go through all that." And the third time that I found out I was pregnant, I knew that I couldn't have another child, for the child's sake and for my children's sake. And I just knew. And I guess I had matured enough to realize what I was capable of at that point in my life. And I said a prayer. And for me, that was unusual because I was pretty detached from a relationship with a higher power. And I got on my knees and I just said, "God, help me find how can I get through this?" I was so scared, and I felt this warmth and comfort come over me. And I knew that the child wasn't mine to keep, that he was special. I felt this beautiful spirit, but that I needed to find the family that he would end up with, that he had a specific family. And so I started looking. I went to different attorneys' offices, and I remember numerous attorneys trying to tell me why their clients would be the right fit, but I just really felt strongly that there was a family for him. And eventually I found the Pendletons. It was the last file at the last lawyer's office. And I knew right when I saw them that, they were just hugging in front of a Christmas tree, and they already had 3 boys. I knew I was going to have a boy, but for some reason, I knew that's where he needed to be. And the lawyer told me, I'm not going to set that up for you because they already have children. So I said, "Well, I know where they live because I saw their file. So I'm going to go find them." That's my stubborn side. So he set the meeting up. It was a really special time in my life. They were there for every doctor appointment. They came for the ultrasound. And I remember feeling like this is what I want for myself someday, to have this, they loved each other. They were excited about the child, and they really loved and supported me. My mother at the time was really struggling again with her own self-worth. And so she said, "I can't be there for that. It's too hard for me." And so I just chose to do it with this family. Right after I had David, I remember feeling so empty, just empty inside. And I didn't get counseling. I didn't know anything about trauma, or, I just kept trying to power through my life. I went back to work, and the doctor prescribed Percocet, prescription drugs for me, for pain. And I remember the first time I took a Percocet thinking, this is the answer to my problems. It just filled that emptiness for me. And I really struggled, and things progressively got worse, which happens with drug addiction. I couldn't work anymore. I quit my job, and I came home late one night. My mom was watching my 2 children, And when I walked in the door, my son was crying, my 9-year-old son. And my mom just looked at me and said, "How could you do this?" She said, "Why isn't this enough for you? I would never understand why these children aren't enough for you." And that night I picked up my son, I walked downstairs and I sobbed and I begged the God that I had prayed to take this from me. I said, "Please, I'm so tired of suffering and hurting the people I love, whatever it takes." And the next day I went to a counselor and I started down the path of sobriety. And the thing that I learned from that was I learned that God has power, I don't. As I turned to him, I'm like, he is powerful because he did something for me I couldn't do for myself, which was I stayed sober. I remember 9 months in, and I thought, this is the first time I felt free in my life. These principles that they were teaching me. I was going to 12-step meetings. I had people that were supporting me and encouraging me. I was doing things that were uncomfortable. I was praying, I was working some principles of service and looking inside myself to take accountability for some things in my life. And the other thing that I've learned is when you do the right thing, everything else just works out, So I took these simple steps. Excuse me for a minute. And as I did that, I met this amazing man and I wasn't looking, just so you know. Stop looking because they show up when you're doing the right things. And so I ended up getting married. My husband, who I'm married to now, adopted our children, my children, they're our children. And so many beautiful things happened. I remember waking up every day grateful, just grateful that I had the sobriety that I had. We had a really simple, modest home. He was working. I actually started my own photography business and it was going well. And I continued to, the first time I went to an activity with my kids, I remember going to it was a field trip. And I remember sitting there and feeling so joyful, like I'm a good mom here. I'm looking around at the other moms going, you don't know how hard I worked to get here. And I also remember it was actually the activity was at the zoo and looking around at all the animals and thinking, if God could put all of this together, he can fix my crazy life. It was just a real moment of clarity for me. So I would love to tell you that was the amazing ending, but it wasn't. And I've learned that there's always more down the road that we can learn from and grow from. And I'm really grateful I had those experiences because they taught me my own strength and they taught me that there is a higher power out there that loves us so much more than we could comprehend. And he's working in our lives wherever we're at and the people's lives that we love. So after I had our first child, my business was really growing. In fact, I was photographing about 200 weddings a year as a photographer. I had employees. I had 2 children that I'm trying to, show up in their lives, have a new child. Chad and I had our first child together. We decided to build a home to accommodate my photography business. And the market was growing at that point. And then my back went out and I had to have back surgery. And when that happened, the doctor prescribed prescription drugs. And I didn't tell him, I wasn't honest about my previous addiction. I had close to 5 years sober. But as I look back, I can see there were so many areas in my life that were depleted. I wasn't taking the time for myself. I wasn't doing those basic things that got me where I was. I was so busy working and I lost myself in that. And I started using the drugs again. And it didn't take very long before my judgment was poor. And I got involved in some real estate deals that when I first saw them, I thought, oh, I would never do that. That's just out, I'm just really focused on buying lots and selling lots because if I can make enough money, I won't have to work as a photographer so hard anymore. Instead of pulling back and slowing down, being more intentional. So I got involved in those deals about 6 months after I got involved in real estate and they were illegal. I didn't think they were, but they were. And I remember when the FBI showed up at my house and trying to argue and tell them all the things I wasn't doing, instead of just saying, this is what I did, let's look at it and move forward. And I spent a lot of time in denying to myself and to others what was going on, denying about, to myself, my addiction and where I really was. And those are years that I regret, because I wasn't the mother I could have been. And I wasn't, I don't remember those years fondly. In fact, recently I've been walking through some of that pain, and that's hard for me to remember. But the day came where, regardless of the denying that I did, I had to walk into a federal courtroom. And I remember a feeling of aloneness that I hadn't felt up to that point, a feeling of sorrow that I never want to experience again. Looking back at my husband, at this point, we had 5 children. So that gives you an idea of how much time lapsed in there. There were years that instead of just owning where I was and moving forward, I kept denying it. And because I truthfully thought that I couldn't go to prison. I thought, I can't go. Who will I be? My life will be a complete failure if I go to prison. And that day, as I sat in the courtroom, I had the opportunity to get up and apologize for the things that I had done to my family and to my community. And I remember, again, saying a prayer and asking God to give me strength greater than I had. And I remember my life at that point has never been the same. It was a shift for me. It was a powerful moment of truth and acknowledgement, but I also knew that I was going to get through what lied ahead. I had 8 weeks to say goodbye to my children. I was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. I didn't know how much time I would do. I couldn't even fathom a year away from my family, let alone years, My little girl, my youngest, was 7 years old. So when the judge said 7 years, I thought, I can't do that, I remember driving home from the courthouse and looking around at people and wondering why they were still acting like life was the same, because it was completely different for me after that point. The way I saw everything, I wondered how I could have been so foolish. How could I have thought money was important? The only thing that mattered to me was the time I had left with my children. I had a business I was trying to run. I stopped everything. And I spent that 8 weeks saying goodbye to my children. I walked into a federal prison in Dublin, California. My husband drove me there, and I felt devastated. I walked into a world that I didn't know. No one looked very happy to see me. I mean, I grew to love the women I spent time with, but at that point in time, I was very broken. And after a couple of days of just being curled up in a ball, I got on my knees and I prayed and I asked God, I said, I feel like nobody. I have failed so bad here, He said, I'm not a mother. I'm not a photographer. I'm not a wife. I don't know who I am. I need help. Who am I to you? And I felt so loved in that moment. I felt so loved. And I could see how valuable I was and how valuable the women that I spent time with in prison were. And I could see that I had an important purpose, which was surprising, because at the place that I was at, I didn't see, before that moment, I couldn't see how I could even be a felon and come home and have a life. I'm so grateful for that experience. And I would suggest anyone, struggling to really seek a connection to your higher power or to nature, whatever it is for you, because I found a worth in myself and a strength I didn't have. I came to know the value of others, and it really gave me what I needed to go on this journey that would change my life. My first 2 years were pretty rough, honestly. My first 2 years, the first year, I think I was just so sad and so broken, and the devastation of being away from my children was overwhelming, and I couldn't really accept that I was going to be there as long as I was. I just kept thinking something will work out. And after a year, I got transferred to Minnesota, and I remember driving, they put you in chains and shackles when they ship you to a different prison. So that was, up to that point, I had just walked into the prison, but now I was chained and shackled. And I remember being on a bus and they're driving us. First of all, they flew us, which was a whole nother experience. And I'll share more about that in my book, until you've experienced Con Air. But I had that experience, and so I can, I can share a connection with others that have experienced that I think is pretty cool. But at the point, it didn't seem very cool to me. It's pretty traumatic. And so I ended up, they took us to a bus. There's officers with big shotguns, and we get on this bus all chained and shackled. And as we're driving, it was hours and hours out to the prison that they were sending me to. And I felt so sad. I thought, how could this be happening? I'm so far away from my family, and I just cried. And when we got there, I found a tree outside in the rec yard, and I spent months and months out there crying. I would just go out there and pray and say, please help me, bless my children, protect them. I'm not there, And I got to a place where I could see that there was a few things that I could do in the situation that I was in to change my life. I kept begging God, please send me home to my children. I'll be a good mother. I'll never break a rule in my life. Like, I would make all these deals. And then I realized that through prayer and just through studying, that I could choose to focus on being a good mother in the situation that I was in. And I think that's been a valuable lesson for me, because whenever things get too big and too scary, I can always zero in on the things that are within my control. And one of those things for me was I could write letters to my children. The most important thing was to fix myself, was to get very honest with myself, take accountability for my choices, develop good habits, spend time in nature. I could serve others. So I made a list of all the things that I could do in the situation that I was in. And I would write my list out every day. And I started focusing on what I could do to be a good mother and to heal in the situation that I was in. And one of those things was taking full accountability for my life. And I made a very large spreadsheet. It took me months. And I shared everything on that list that I had done in my life to hurt anyone, my children, and took full responsibility for that. I told my family that I was 100% responsible for everything that happened, that the government didn't do me dirty, that nobody else was at fault but me. And that wasn't easy for my kids to accept, because it's a lot easier for kids to see us as a victim. It's just easier, but I knew that by owning where I was, that there was a place of truth and power to move forward. And so I found accountability to be extremely empowering for me. I started dreaming again and created a new vision of what my life would look like. The other thing that helped me as I opened up and was honest with the women around me was that I was able to connect with them in such a beautiful way. And they started sharing their stories with me. And so I found these incredible, beautiful women who had struggled in ways that I can't even comprehend, were supporting me, and I was supporting them. And we had this beautiful connection. I was transferred into a unit that was designed to help women just deal with a variety of different struggles. One of them would be addiction, but there were other things. We were working on setting healthy boundaries, and we were working on assertive communication and accountability. And they made me a leader in that program. And I was able to sit with women and hear their stories, teach them how to resolve conflict, how to communicate their feelings. I grew from that more than anyone, I promise. Like, that was such a benefit to me. And I developed such a strong desire to see people heal and grow. I think the time that I spent in nature has been such a strength in my life. That's one thing I love about what you're doing, Rhonda, is just that you're connecting people to something so powerful and beautiful. And I learned how to meditate. I would walk the track every morning, and I would just clear my mind of thoughts, and I would appreciate the sound of a bird. Or, sunsets were like, I'll never enjoy a sunset the way I did there. I felt so connected to nature and connected to God and my purpose. And I knew that I would never focus again on money, because I'm going to die without it. Like, nobody's going to have it when they leave, And I found something so much more powerful than that for me. And I'm grateful for that. The connection with others. We'll talk more about this later, but some of the things that I get to do now in my life are so meaningful. I'm not going to say that my journey was the easiest or or it's over, or I came home and everything was magic. But I learned things while I was on this journey that have blessed my children and will bless generations. And I know no matter what situation we're in, we can find that. We can find that element that we can focus on that will change. And I also want to say, just don't ever give up, because I felt pretty destitute and I have a lot of hope today. And I want to pass the time to you, Rhonda. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share a message today with these, I don't know if they're women, men, or who, but I love you all. And I'm grateful for every opportunity I get to share the beauty and love that I found in federal prison. So.
Wow. Thank you so much. You're amazing. And I feel like we got some really good information from what you shared with us. I'm going to share my screen with everyone so that you can tell us a little bit more about your book, and we'll go through the slides and you can explain. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's interesting because when I came home, I didn't know what it would look like for me. I went from being a photographer when I first got home to working at a treatment center with women with addiction and trauma. And then people started reaching out and asked me if I would share my story, and I was happy to do that. And I had no idea if writing a book seemed like a difficult task. But as I spent the evenings with these women at this treatment center and I would share my stories, they loved them. So I started writing, and they were my proofreaders, and I would send them to my friends in prison and they would read them. And I'm so grateful that I was able to put down, I think I had so much in my heart that just my heart had to open and I had to share it. And so, yeah, things have just happened. And I just want to just tell your viewers that that's what happens when you find yourself and your purpose. All these things show up in your life to support that purpose, because I didn't really plan it. It just kind of showed up, but I did know what was important to me and what values I wanted to focus on in my life. So
great. And you can find out more about her stories in her book, which is amazing. And then tell us now what you're doing
okay.
today.
Yeah, so I get all these really cool opportunities. One of them, I still work at a treatment center. I don't work anywhere full time, but I do a lot of things that I love. I work at a mental health facility, and I mentor people that are dealing with anxiety and depression. And that's group therapy here in Utah. And then I also, one night a week, I go work with people with addictions. And the thing that I absolutely love, and I'm going to be doing it tonight, and I did it yesterday, is I get to go in with these kids that are struggling. The women that I work with, or the young girls, the teenagers, have been in and out of foster care, and they don't know their worth. And they're just beautiful, amazing spirits. I had one of the girls, I asked them to each pick a word. I'm like, pick a word that you want to focus on this week. And one of them couldn't come up with a word. And then she looked up at me and she said, I just want to be good. And I said, you are so good. You are good. She looks down and I said, no, I want you to look at me. I want you to know how good you are. And I adore these girls, and their challenges are great. But I believe in them. There's a path. I've given them all my book. They read it. And when I come back, they tell me, oh, I'm going to do this and this, I'll probably write another book about them, because I love this journey that I'm on and being able to share these experiences. So
that's awesome. And they can reach you on your website. We have the link at the bottom.
Yeah, they can. And I'm really active on Facebook. I have people with family members that are either going to be incarcerated or kids that are dealing with addiction that reach out to me. I love to support in any way I can. The Sobriety Foundation, also, I just saw that. Such a cool organization. We provide transitional housing for people that are getting out of treatment. That month or two is so important before they just go right back into the same stuff. And we provide some accountability, and we pay for that for them. So these are organizations that I love, people that I love, and I've seen lives change. Like, I have seen lives change. When we love and serve others, we can make such a difference. So
thank you. And so this is where they can get your book?
Yeah, they can. It's available on Audible. It's also available on Amazon, and they can find it on my website as well. it's not just my story. I mean, it's a story that shares the women that I met with and their stories. And they have amazing strength and resilience. And, you know, whatever the struggle is, I think there's a message in there of overcoming. If you're dealing with kids with addiction, there's two things I would say to people dealing with kids with addiction. One, do not give up. And two, take care of yourself, you know, and because you lose yourself in that. And also I would just say, I'm so sorry you're going through that, because I've been that kid. I know how hard it is on parents, but yeah, this is just my message of love, compassion, accountability. And I feel super grateful and honored that I was able to write it, and I've loved sharing it. So
Thank you. And you're most important.
oh, yes. I want to just tell you. Okay, so this is my people right here. The cute little guy in the back with the curly hair, his name is David, and he's the son I gave up for adoption with his little girl. My life has been so beautiful. The restoration, it's not perfect, but it's so beautiful. And these people have grown with me. And you know, it's so easy to look when you're struggling and just feel bad and get stuck. But I'm telling you that there is something beautiful on the other side. And then it gets hard, and then it gets beautiful. And this to me represents so much beauty in my life. So I'm grateful. My husband's kind of a hero. My kids are all amazing. And we're still very imperfect and still struggle every day. So, yeah.
Oh, it's a beautiful family. We are so thankful. And Portia, we want to thank you for sharing your incredible journey with us today. And we all were inspired by your message. And I'd like to invite you back. I think we could have listened to you for an hour, and so we'll have to have you back on.
Yeah, that would be great. I figured I sometimes talk too much, so I hope that I didn't wear people out, but
you did amazing. Thank you so much. So we want to thank everyone for joining the show today. Join us next week and every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And remember, it's never too early and it's never too late to make those good choices to live a natural, healthy, and happy lifestyle.